to day 3, week 3 of how to grow your own food here with the Sweet Gum Spot. Thank you for tuning in to today's video. It's going to be a very information-filled video, but it is also going to be one that is going to set your garden up for success for years to come. So if you watch any of these videos, this is probably the most important one because this is all about soil health and making sure that the environment you're putting your plants in is going to help them survive and thrive, and also give back to the earth as well. And container if you're in container gardens. So today, if you look at your notes, you will see that I have kind of the 5 topics we're going to be talking about. So we're going to start talking about in-ground versus container gardening and how to prepare those spaces. Then we're going to talk about tilling and whether or not to do it. We're going to talk about soil amendments, so things you can add to your soil to help facilitate health and growth and biodiversity. And then last but not least, we'll talk about compost and fertilizer. So we're going to talk about all these things, kind of define what they are, help you learn how to do them or not do them, depending on your choice, and hopefully give you some options as well for that. So let's get right into it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is in-ground gardening. So when you are preparing your space, we've talked about, in week 1, we talked about assessing our space. So we know where we're going to plant now, whether that be in a container or in the ground. And then last week we talked about what we want to plant. So we know what we want to plant. So as part of preparing our space for what we want to plant, where we want to plant it, you are going to need, for in-ground gardening, it is highly recommended that you test your soil. So there are 2 very easy ways to do this. The way we did was, as you can see, I have a link there to a soil test kit, and I will go ahead and pull that up and show you. Basically, you just take from the spot where you are going to be planting, you will take a little bit of dirt, as you can see here, put it in each of these 4 little containers. Look, it's zooming in for me. So look, so this one tests pH level, which is your acidity of the dirt, then nitrogen, then phosphorus, then potassium. So you'll put a little bit of dirt in. If you can see, there's like a line here filled with soil. And then you fill the rest with water, and you shake it up, and you let it sit until everything settles. And the remaining water will have a color along one of these guides here, and it'll show you whether you have a surplus or a deficient, or whether you have super alkaline, which is like basic soil, or really acidic soil, all that kind of stuff. So that's your first option. You can go ahead and get that. It was $17.90, and I think we got ours at, I don't remember if we ordered it off Amazon. That is the exact one we have, so we might have. Or you can get it at your local hardware store. That's a super fast, easy way to do it, so you know right away. Another option you have, however, if you have a little bit more time or something you can think about for planning for the future, is getting a soil analysis. Now, this is something I'm super curious to get done, maybe in our garden now, but definitely when we move to a larger property. A soil analysis is something where you actually take like a tube full of dirt, and you go ahead and you send this tube full of dirt off to this organization or this company. And so the website here, I'll show it to you if it'll let me click. Here we go. There's actually a website that has all the lists. A lot of these places are universities or they're university affiliated. So, all right, so state-by-state list of soil testing labs at cooperative extension offices. Very fancy name for just basically a university that will test your soil for you. And they are going to give you the same information as the test that we just talked about with the 4 different ingredients, but they're also going to give you a whole lot more. So basically they can give you a more in-depth look at your soil as like some different nutrients like calcium, different minerals and things like that, and it'll show you too how much clay is in your soil versus how much loam or whatever, so that it's a more detailed breakdown. So if gardening is something you plan on doing for a longer time, or you are moving onto a new property and you want to see what you need to do or how good the soil is, this is a really great option, and it's really affordable too. So I'm going to go down to Indiana here because this is my state, but it literally shows you for every single state in the US where you're going to go, which is really fun. So in Indiana, we go to Purdue University Soil Sampling and Testing. So I click on this, and it takes me all the way down here, soil testing information. And so it'll show you have this is the tube thing. So you stick this down in the ground, you take out basically a little cylinder of soil, and you'll collect the sample, and then you send it off to them. So A&L Great Lakes Laboratories here in Fort Wayne, this is where I would send my soil if I was going to get it analyzed. And so I get it $20, and you get pH, all these other things. Some of them I don't even know, to be honest. Phosphorus, potassium, organic matter, magnesium, calcium, cation exchange capacity. I don't know what that is. But it's really detailed, and it'll actually give you suggestions too. So I actually looked on this company's website because I was interested, and I'm not certain where to find it now, but they will actually, one of the options you can select is like suggestions. So they'll give you the whole analysis, and then they'll give you recommendations of what amendments that we're going to be talking about that you might need to add and how much to add them and things like that. So your two options for testing your soil are a kit that you can buy yourself or a soil analysis. So they're both about the same price. The soil testing, or the kit, it gives you a limited amount of nutrients, I guess. It's only 4 of them, versus the analysis will give you a whole lot more information. But if you're short on time, or you're maybe just starting out and you don't even know what like cation exchange or whatever that is, then you might not be ready for that analysis. But it's also like, if you have time, it's really cool because it just gives you, it's like a really good report on the health of your soil. So it's good to know. And it actually could be something, if you're looking at new property and you're like into homesteading and something like that, a lot of the properties will say soil has been tested or soil analysis can be provided because people are going to want to know whether they can grow in that area. So that's the first thing you're going to want to do, is if you're growing in ground, test your soil in some manner. Then we get to the question, to till or not to till. So tilling is when you break up the soil. You kind of work it around, make it nice and loose. You can dig up just a few inches, sometimes in more commercial operations, or if you're in like a super big garden, they'll till even all the way up to a foot. So it's really turning the soil, really mixing things up. You'd think this would be a great idea, right? Like, loosen it up, it's good, everything's good to go. However, it breaks up the compacted soil, which is great because once you get down past a certain level, a lot of times that is compacted just from weather and animals and people and everything. But it mixes in organic matter, and when it's mixing that, it actually is disrupting the biodiversity in the soil. Because soil, like if you remember our diagram of the earth when we were in like grade school or middle school, the earth has layers. And so our soil has layers just like the earth. And they might be not as thick as the crust of the earth and the, I'm blanking, mantle of the earth, but they have layers just like that. So you're going to have the top layer, you're going to have the middle layer, which might be some more of that clayey or that rocky stuff, and then down in the deep. Now, we are only really planting in that first 1, maybe 2 feet of soil. And so we want everything, and like each layer has its own little ecosystem. So if you move things from a really deep layer up to the top layer, they're not going to survive, and vice versa works the same way. So we don't want to disrupt the biodiversity of our soil, or we want to disrupt it as little as possible. So mixing in all that organic matter, it's a good thing, sort of, in terms of it loosens it up, but it's also not really necessary because there's other ways to get that done that I'll tell you about here in a little bit. And then tilling also aerates the soil so that moisture can enter. So the thing, like I said, about tilling is that it's just kind of aggressive, and it hurts the health of the soil more than helps it in the end. And so some alternatives to that are you can just cultivate, which means that's really just a couple inches. You have your little spade instead of some big machine. You have your little spade, and you're just loosening up just the top layer, which is fine. Okay, just so that you can plant your seeds in there nice and loosely so that they can breathe, so that they can grow, stretch out, expand their roots, and all that kind of stuff. And then you can amend your soil, which we're going to talk about all the different types of amendments. So those are things, additives like vitamins, supplements that you can give to your soil to bring it to a really nice, healthy level of nutrition, and so that it is full of life and food for all your plants. And then the last thing you can do, well, not the last, but another alternative is you can actually just plant on top. So we are experimenting with this in our new section of our garden. This is called a Back to Eden garden, and it's really, really cool. So instead of digging into the earth that you have and dealing with all the soil that you have, whether it's healthy or not, the Back to Eden garden actually plants on top. So it starts with some kind of weed barrier, which might be landscape fabric, or cardboard is really great because it breaks down easily. And then some compost, so you have some food and worms and things. And then mulch, or a deep bedding of wood chips. So we have that going in there. Now the thing is that this year we are accepting the fact that portion of the garden, it'll probably grow things, but it probably won't be so amazing just yet, because even though we put a bunch of those wood chips in the fall, it hasn't had a ton of time to break down and really sop in all those nutrients. So the deep bedding and the Back to Eden gardening is a phenomenal method of gardening. It is tried and true, it works, but it is something that is definitely more long-term, because you are working on transforming a space, and you are actually transforming the health of the dirt there, which is great because monoculture and just your commercial agriculture places, a lot of them do they till. Two, they just dig right into the dirt, and they use it and use it and use it and use it, and that's why all of this kind of desertification is happening, where the soil is just dead, there's nothing left. Whereas if you go to, or you see, a permaculture setup, or some kind of Back to Eden setup, or someone's hobby garden, where they have worked on actually maintaining the soil health instead of just getting a bunch of production out there, that soil is going to be black, so black and full of worms and bugs, which I don't like, but I know they're necessary. And it is so, 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 so healthy. And so the Back to Eden garden, that allows all of the nutrients from the mulch and the compost and all of that seep down into the dirt that was already there, and it actually transforms that soil to be phenomenally fertile, which is amazing. So for this season, if you don't know what your soil is, or if you don't have a great setup at the moment, go ahead and cultivate and amend that soil, and you're good to go. But definitely consider some of that Back to Eden gardening, that deep bedding. I do have a link that explains it in more detail if that's something that's interesting to you, because that's a setup that is going to take care of you for years to come. And the soil just keeps getting better and better and better, and all you have to do is keep adding more wood chips. So it's really, really cool. So that being said, if we are going to be cultivating and amending our soil, we need to know what the amendments are. So you might have guessed that healthy soil has at least 4 main nutrients in it, or things that you monitor. I don't know that pH is a nutrient, but it has nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and then a pH level of some sort, an acidity level. Nitrogen is the nutrient, the chemical that, or the element that encourages leaf production. So your plants like spinach and lettuce and kale, I mean any leafy green, is going to want a lot of nitrogen because that helps all those leaves grow, okay? Phosphorus is an element that produces or promotes root growth and also fruit production. So you're going to want to make sure all your root vegetables, like carrots and beets and potatoes and turnips, all that kind of stuff, they have lots of phosphorus, as well as your cucumbers and your tomatoes, anything that makes a flower, which means that's a fruit. So anything that makes a flower and then turns into something that's a fruit, you want to make sure those all have lots of phosphorus because that is going to help encourage them to keep growing roots if they're a root vegetable or keep producing more flowers if they're a fruiting fruit. Now I was going to say fruiting vegetable, but if they're a fruit. Potassium is a great nutrient for the plant or for the soil. It helps plants' overall growth and health. So it just adds in there, it promotes vitality, so it helps them fight off disease, it helps them be more sturdy, all that kind of stuff. And then your pH level, there's not necessarily a good or a bad pH level. Neutral is nice because it's easier to amend, but some plants you'll see prefer an acidic soil versus some prefer a more alkaline or basic soil. So off the top of my head, I know for a fact blueberries, like a lot of your berry bushes and things like that, they prefer more acidic soil, whereas lettuces and tomatoes and stuff like that need more of a neutral soil. So those are the 4 things, at least, that you're going to find in your soil analysis or your soil test that you can amend easily. And if you focus on those 4 main things, 3 main macronutrients, potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus, and then your pH level, you're going to be great. You're going to be good to go. If you want to get deeper, you can also look into supplementing calcium, some other minerals and things like that as well to help to get even further into it. But these 4 things are going to be the main things you need to worry about. So, how do we do this? How do we add these ingredients into our soil? And how do we do it quickly? Because planting season is coming and we want to make sure that everything's ready. So there's, just like I talked about with tilling and cultivating and deep bedding and all of that, there are some options. So you can amend your soil in more of a quick release way, but you can also amend your soil in maybe like in the fall or at the end of the season to help it recover and give it some things that will be more of a slow release that are going to help that soil over time. I would encourage you to do both, but for now we're probably going to start with those quicker options. So for nitrogen, we're going to talk about, for all of these I tried to come up with some more natural things and then also some things that you can buy in the store and all that kind of stuff. So nitrogen is very cool because it's got lots of options. So your coffee grounds actually have nitrogen in them. So you can always put coffee grounds at the base of your plant or mix it in with your compost, and that will help add a little nitrogen boost. Worm castings. I have a few visual aids today. Worm castings. I got some of these this year, which I'm very excited about. Now, worm castings, I know you can't see me, encourage root growth, which is great. They improve soil structure. They're naturally odor-free. This is worm poop, basically. And they're non-burning. So we'll talk about that when we get to fertilizers and compost. But there are things that you need to break down before you put them on your plants. And then there are things that you can put on right away. This you can put on right away. And so this is just super fertile. It gives you directions of what to put on in there. And it says here, so this is 0.50% 0.5% nitrogen, 0.3% iron, and then all your other worm poop ingredients. But worm castings is one option, okay? Then you can also do blood meal. That sounds appetizing, doesn't it? It is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It is blood from animals that have been butchered, and it's broken down, and it's just a great source of nitrogen for plants. So this says, 12% nitrogen. That is literally the only ingredient. It's backwards, but that's the only ingredient. So this is going to be super great, very quick release, which means it's going to start feeding your plants right away. This is not expensive. I don't remember the exact price, but you can order this on Amazon. Job's Organics. You can get it at most of your local garden stores. But all of these things, we'll talk about it more, but please try your best to avoid those synthetic fertilizers, because these natural ingredients, they help give the soil what it needs, and then it can start to get its own biodiversity and start creating all of its own good nutrients. Whereas if you rely on synthetics, then it just becomes dependent on them. So that's going to cost you money and cost your soil its health. So other things you can do to promote nitrogen in your soil, you can actually plant nitrogen-fixing plants, such as peas and beans. So peas and beans do a great job of this. The one thing you would want to take into consideration is that if you want them to truly be nitrogen-fixing, you're going to have to cut them down before they flower. So you wouldn't really get your peas and beans. You can still cut them down, and they'll still give you some help with that, but that's kind of what you call a cut and chop and drop. So you would grow the plant up, and then before it goes to seed, you'd cut it down and then let all of those nutrients seep into the ground. Then you can do some cover crops. So this is just that chop and drop method of composting, fertilizing, like I was talking about. You grow a bunch of something. It could be some greens. It could be some plants. I mean, they have specific plants that are used as cover crops, and then you just cut them down and leave them be. That's more of a slow release option, okay? So coffee grounds, worm castings, and blood meal are going to be your quickest options. These next three, planting plants, cover crops, and compost, are three slower options. Now, compost is kind of either, because you can always give your plant a little extra boost right whenever you plant it. Give some compost around the base of the plant there. But it also does do well just mixed in with your soil in general at the end of the season to help give it a little bit of a recovery as well as a boost. So compost is just overall great. Now we get to phosphorus. So phosphorus in general does release pretty quickly. So that's something that it's not so much of something you're going to be putting at the end of the season so that this is a long-term adding of phosphorus. No, this is just something kind of every year. You might put a little bit of extra in there. Your four options are bone meal, fish meal, compost, and kelp. Woohoo. It actually makes me think of, so the Native Americans back in the day, if you didn't know this, this is kind of interesting, I think. They had a specific method of planting called the Three Sisters garden. And I might screw part of it up, but so they would take a dead fish, which makes me think of the bone meal and the fish meal, okay? And they dig a hole and they put a dead fish in the bottom. And then they would plant corn seeds. And so then they'd plant the corn seeds, and the corn would grow up and up and up. And then they'd plant bean seeds around the corn. So the beans would climb up, and they would use the corn as a trellis. So they're getting corn and beans. And then they would plant some squash or pumpkins around the beans. And then the squash would go around and out and out and out. And as those vines broke down, that actually provided a compost breaking down into the soil. So it was this whole cycle of, okay, we're growing up, we're using this as the trellis, then we're also fertilizing the area around it. And the fish, the dead fish in the hole where they planted, provided all that organic matter, that nice oomph of fertilizer right as the plants were starting. So this, Fish meal, bone meal, it's kind of a modern version of that. You could also do that. We had a squirrel die in our backyard last year, and we put it in a hole and planted a tomato over it, and it worked great because they have tons of organic matter and tons of nutrients in their blood and their bones and things that as they break down, we're going to be able to use that for food as food for our plants. So potassium, like I said, that aids in overall growth and health. So some options you have here. Again, they're more quick-ish release plants or quick-ish release elements. Wood ash, they call it potash. I think it's potash, I'm not sure. You can buy it in stores as that, or if you have a fire outside, take the ash from your fire and go and sprinkle it. That's all you need to do. And then banana peels, which are really cool too. You can literally just chop them up into little pieces. You don't even need them to break down in your compost. And you set them around the base of your plant, let it go, and it'll soak in and do its thing. Some of these things you do need to be careful with, and it'll tell you when you purchase whatever, whether you buy worm castings or bone meal, all that kind of stuff. You can overdo it and like either harm your plant or create a surplus in your soil, which I think in the case of phosphorus can actually become toxic. So just be aware. It's very difficult to do that, but that's why they have like directions on how much per square foot to add and all that kind of stuff. So those are the three things. Now, in order to adjust your pH level, which this is, like I said, very important if you're planting any berries or other vegetables or fruits that need maybe more acidic or less acidic soil. If you have a highly acidic soil, then you're going to want to definitely neutralize it. So to make your soil less acidic, you can buy ground limestone. They have it in like Home Depot, agricultural, and you just sprinkle that around, and that adds, or it takes away some of that acidity and makes it a bit more alkaline. And then to lower your pH level, to make it more acidic, you can use aluminum sulfate, which is sulfur, and same thing, sprinkle it around, and that'll help to raise the acidity. You can also, if you're planting like fruits and vegetables in one area, but your berry bushes in another area, like in our instance, you can just target your coverage of that to that area. There's no need for you to put it everywhere, obviously. But the thing about acidity is that is the one that it really does take time. So it's fine. Like you can still add some right now, but I would definitely amend it again in the fall if you're planting in the ground. So you can do it in the fall, and then if you're going to do it right now, just make sure you get it in the ground at least 3 weeks before you plant. So that would be like the first or second week of April for us. So that means get testing your soil so you know what you need to do, because you want a couple weeks at least for these things to soak in. I will also say, I didn't mention this, but where the nutrients are listed here in the course notes, there's a link on each of these. So there's a link on nitrogen, there's a link on phosphorus, potassium, and pH, and they all link to separate articles from places and sources that I found that just talk more in depth about what that nutrient does and what you can do to add it to your soil. So if you want some further reading, that is where you go, which is great. All right, so then another thing we need to do to prepare our space is to prevent some weeds, because weeds are no good. They're not bad, but they take up a lot of that energy that we want our plants to be having instead. So you can do cardboard, like I said when I was talking about the Back to Eden gardening. It's called sheet mulching. So you put out all your old cardboard boxes, not with a ton of writing on them, but lay them real flat, and then you cover them with like a tarp or with mulch, and then that suppresses the growth of weeds, and the cardboard also breaks down in there. So that's one way to do it. You can use like weed fabric or landscape fabric, and then mulch as well. So you can use one of those, a combination. Obviously, I would suggest you get something to cover the cardboard because it'll blow away. But yeah, so that's the thing. And if weeds do crop up in your garden space or wherever, that's okay. I mean, obviously, pull them out as soon as you notice them. You'll know it's a weed because it always comes out very easily. Plants, their roots are harder to like remove because they are really grounded, but weeds come up so fast that they just like slip right on out of there. So you can do like you can just like pull the weed out and then leave it there, because that is a type of that chop and drop mulching that I was talking about, where that one weed or 5 weeds, as it breaks down, it's going to give health to your soil, so long as there's no seeds. If it still has seeds, then obviously remove it, but if you can let it dry out and then bring it back, totally fine. Okay, so enough of in-ground gardening. Now we're going to get to container gardening. So for container gardening, you're going to be providing your own soil, obviously, your own mix of planting medium. And so the thing I recommend, the thing that we did for our raised beds, and I would recommend if you can do for any container as well, or at least try to find a potting soil that has these properties, is do a mix. Now, the one I have linked here is Mel's Mix. Mel Bartholomew, the founder of Square Foot Gardening, the Square Foot Gardening Method. He does a mix that is 1/3 compost, 1/3 peat moss, and 1/3 vermiculite. So the compost is not just one type of compost. I'll talk to you in like 2 minutes about compost and how you can have animal or plant-based, mushroom, all that kind of stuff. So you find a mix of composts because they all have different types of benefits. Then the peat moss, and so the compost is what's going to obviously fuel your plant's growth. The peat moss is really great at helping retain water and keeping things loose so the plants have room to grow. And then the vermiculite, which is actually, it's some kind of mineral that's just broken down really finely. That also, it helps water retention, but it again helps to keep that soil loose. So Mel's Mix, the whole great thing about it is supposedly, which it depends on what you're planting in there, but you need to like amend it less often because it does have so many nutrients in it at the start, and it stays nice and loose. It doesn't get compacted easily or as quickly. So that's going to help you and save you some time when you go to plant. You won't have to be like digging super hard or anything. So that's Mel's Mix. Then you, in addition to your mix for your container, whether that's your raised bed or your vertical garden or whatever, you're going to want to make sure that you have some options. Either ways to keep the water in if you're in an area where it's going to dry out really fast, or ways to keep the water out so that it doesn't drown. So if you're in a raised bed or like one of those clay pots, those clay pots wick away moisture so fast, okay? And raised beds, it's more of an area and it's not the ground, so again, that moisture is going to go away pretty quickly. So you want to mulch on top of those for sure. You can use grass, you can use leaves, you can use straw, whichever. And then for your plants, and the same would apply to like a clay pot. Just put some grass, some leaves on top there so that retains some moisture. And then for your other planters or like 5-gallon buckets, things like that, make sure before you put dirt in there that you've got holes so that water can drain out, so you're not overwatering and drowning these plants. And then the last thing for container gardening is you will obviously need to fertilize and feed that soil a bit more often than your in-ground soil because it's in a small contained area where there's not especially if you're indoors, there's not going to be like leaves falling or animals pooping in it, hopefully, that are going to help feed that soil health. So you'll want to get some fertilizer, and I mean like 1 to 3 times throughout the season. That'll just help keep things nice and fresh and nice and lots of food for your plants. So that's container gardening. We will talk more in detail about like seed starting mix next week when we talk about starting our seeds, which I can't believe it's already here. That's so exciting. But there are, like I said, if you don't want to do all of Mel's Mix, there are some organic brands of soil. Fox Farms is a great one. I don't have it in the notes, but Fox Farms, I'll talk about them when we do like our seed start talk. but they have potting soil that you can also use just in your raised beds, and it's really great. It's organic, got lots of stuff. So there are other options, but if you can make your own mix, that's the best because then you have control over it. So, all right. So compost. What is it? Why do we need it? Where to get it? All this kind of stuff. So, like I said, compost is one of those things that you can use to amend your soil and also just feed it and encourage that health throughout the season. That it's like an all-purpose. It's like a cure-all. It's awesome. So, compost is broken down organic material that helps the health of your soil and then obviously helps your plants grow and thrive. So, you can have all different types of compost. You can have animal-based compost, which is like manure. You can have plant-based compost, which is leaves, mulch, food scraps, all that kind of stuff. And you can have vermicompost. I said mushroom, that's kind of a plant, but vermicompost is made from worms. So worms actually break that down, and they use that as well. So that's kind of, our worm castings are a type of vermicompost, I believe. So the main things you want to look for whenever you are sourcing your compost, if you're not making it yourself, are that there's no herbicides or pesticides. So if this compost was created or made in a place where those chemicals are, odds are all the good stuff in your compost is dead. So like, what's the point? You want it to be 100% compost. So you don't want it to be mixed in with soil. Then again, you're wasting your money because you want all the good stuff, all the nutrients. You got plenty of dirt. You can get that elsewhere. And then, it's not on here. It's in a link where it says compost, but it doesn't want to smell. It wants to smell nice and earthy. It doesn't want to smell like ammonia or like rotting things. No, that means it's not done breaking down. So you want to make sure that you are getting some nice, earthy, fully broken down compost that is 100% compost, no chemicals, good to go. And then if you are buying from a store, make sure you get a mix of plant and animal-based compost. So like I was talking about with Mel's Mix, the benefit of that is there's obviously different nutrients that come from manure versus like plants. And so having a mix creates the best of both worlds for you. You'll also see, it's really dependent upon what you want, but like they will sell compost that's from chicken poo or beef or whatever, so a pig. So there's all different kinds. So just make sure you look and determine what it is that you want. We make our own compost, so I haven't looked a whole bunch into the differences between like chicken compost versus cow compost, other than I know that, as we talk about in fertilizers here in a minute, chickens have very good fertilizing properties, so something to think about there. Places you can get compost. So obviously, Home Depot, Lowe's, they should be sponsoring this course for how many times I've talked about them. You can also go to your neighborhood garden store. So if you have a local nursery or a local garden store, they will obviously, I'm sure, have some compost, or at least can point you where to get some. Then you can also go to your local municipality or some local organizations. Here in Fort Wayne, we have two that I know of, Ground Down Fort Wayne and Dirt Wayne. And basically, they're both two organizations where you pay a fee, and they'll come pick up your scraps monthly, your food scraps, add it to the compost, and then you get a certain amount of compost at the beginning of the season, or like a delivery of some type. So it's like free compost for your food scraps, and it's a great way to give back to the community and also get great locally made compost. And so those are some options. And then the last one, you can make it yourself. So I'm not going to go into that in detail today because that in and of itself is like a whole course, truly. And we're by no means masters of it yet, but the essentials are basically you have brown matter, which is leaves, dried grass, all that kind of stuff, and green matter, which would be your food scraps and anything that's green, like fresher. And so you do layers of that. So you might do layers of mulch and layers of leaves and layers of food scraps. And then you let it all start, and you water it to keep it moist. And then you start to help it break down. And then every couple weeks you turn it. so that it's constantly getting new air and new flow, and that just, it starts to break down. You'll see hot composting. So if someone like we have a big old pile of wood chips out there in our driveway right now, if I were to stick my shovel right in the middle of it, steam would come out because it's starting to break down. So there's hot composting, there's other types of composting, but the point is the layering and the moisture and the turning all help it to break down. It's very easy though. There are, like, you can buy bins, you can make a little compost heap in your backyard, super space efficient, super cheap to do, and it's a great way to lower your like waste footprint as well, because instead of, like, we maybe put out one garbage bag a week because we recycle a lot, and then we also put all of our food scraps in our compost. So, but benefits on multiple sides there, but that is an option. So then, last but not least, we get to fertilizer. So once we have prepared our space, once our plants are in, we are going to need to feed them throughout the season, potentially. So there's organic fertilizers you can buy and find, and there are inorganic or synthetic fertilizers. So I kind of mentioned this earlier, but organic fertilizers are made to help the biodiversity of the soil. They're encouraging life, they're aiding in soil health, they're doing a lot of positive things. Whereas commercial synthetic chemical fertilizers, they're gonna make your plants grow, but they're gonna like kill your soil health. It's not gonna be great because they're gonna make that soil more and more dependent on those chemicals and more reliant on it, which I just personally don't see the benefit of that, because you're hurting the ecosystem underneath you in your own space. You're spending more money on fertilizer every year, and you're then creating plants that have chemicals as part of their makeup. So I think there's plenty of options of organic fertilizer, which I'm going to tell you here, which do lots of good, combined with those amendments to make a very healthy ecosystem and environment for your plants to live in. So the cool thing, and this is something that I was very confused about at first, but now I feel like I have a better understanding of it, is that when you go to when you go to a store and you look at fertilizers, you'll see they all have a 3-number label. So I'll show you on this one because it's just easy. Like this one says 12-0-0. All right, what the heck does that mean? This number is your NPK number. N standing for nitrogen, or P standing for phosphorus, and K standing for potassium. So that number is a standard order throughout all of the gardener world. And so any fertilizer you look at, it's going to have that three-digit number, and the numbers will change, but the order will always be the same. NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so what it tells you is the amount of each ingredient. So that blood meal that I showed you earlier is at 12-0-0, which means it's 12% nitrogen, 0% phosphorus, and 0% potassium. Our worm castings have, it's kind of difficult to see, but it's a 0.5-0-0. So 0.5% nitrogen, 0% phosphorus, and 0% potassium. And you might wonder, so if there's not anything of the big three in there, why would I use worm castings? So it's a lot of those micronutrients that plants don't get, and a ton of organic matter, which they also need. So they're still great, even though it's maybe less of a percentage. And it also depends on what you need. So worm castings might be a more general little boost, whereas blood meal is something, this area is deficient, so you're going to mix it in right now because it has a much higher concentration of nitrogen. So we got the NPK number. So when you're looking for fertilizers, you want to pick an NPK number that reflects what you need. So like I said, if you have an area that is really deficient in nitrogen, you saw from your soil test, then you're going to get some blood meal, and you're going to sprinkle that all around. If you have something that just needs a general little extra feed, maybe get something like a lot of, a nice standard one is 3-4-5. So 3% nitrogen, 4% phosphorus, 5% potassium. And then you can, I have here in the notes, but if you're growing leafy greens, you'll want nitrogen heavy. If you're growing fruits, you'll want phosphorus heavy, all that kind of stuff. So the 345 number is very helpful once you know what it stands for, but it'll definitely guide you in the right direction. And just as with the amendments, all the fertilizers have directions on application, how much to apply, when to apply it, all that different kind of stuff. So if you don't want to buy a fertilizer, if you're trying to save some money, or if you don't need a bunch, or if you need a lot, and again, you don't want to spend too much money, there are some natural options. These options take a little bit more time, potentially, but they do have lots of benefits. So, first one, grass clippings and leaves. So, the kind of cool thing is that, say you have raised beds, or even just a regular in-ground row, and you need to mulch it because you want to keep those weeds away. Well, you throw some grass clippings on there, you throw some leaves, maybe a little mulch. That's your weed barrier. But what it's also doing is feeding your soil because it's organic matter. So the nutrients, as that plant breaks down, it's going to go into the soil. So those grass clippings and leaves are doing multiple things for you. So that's one option of a fertilizer. The second one is chicken poop. So chicken poop is one of the most fertile things out there. It is full of nutrients. It is plentiful, especially if you have chickens, and it's very, very strong. Now, the thing you have to know about chicken poop or manure is that it's what you call hot. So you can't put it right on a plant because it could burn it, and it could actually like overdo it and then hurt the plant. So a lot of those things have like chicken manure compost, which is what you could use, or if you have a farmer down the road, you can ask for their used bedding. So it's like, because chickens, if they're kept on deep bedding, they poop and pee. Well, they don't pee. Chickens actually don't pee, fun fact. But they poop, and it all breaks down into the soil, into that deep bedding, those wood chips, and then underneath, that's your compost. So if you have chickens, take that stuff and put it in your garden. If you don't, and you know someone who does, ask them for it. And then you'll get a nice free source of compost and fertilizer, which is great. Next thing is rabbit manure. Now this one's cool because it's actually even more nutrient dense than chicken poop. It's got like everything. And the beautiful thing is, if you've seen all the little things in your yard that look like dried up berries, they're not dried up berries, don't try them, but they are rabbit pellets, and they are not hot. So rabbit poop can actually be used right away. You can they do sell bags of it. If you have rabbits, you can source it yourself, or if you're like really trying to save some pennies, you can go out in your yard and find all the little nuggets and deposit them in your plant. We actually didn't even have to do that because our bunnies, well, our yard bunnies, we don't have rabbits yet, but the bunnies in our yard have been in our garden throughout the winter, so there's lots of little gifts in there. And I am all happy for that because that is so much food and nutrients and health that they are adding to our soil without us having to do anything, which is great. So rabbit manure is great. You can literally put it right on your plant. You don't have to worry about anything. It's not going to burn the plant. Beautiful. And then the last one, which is a little weird, but I'm putting it in there because it is free, because we all have it. Urine. Believe it or not, is a fertilizer, a natural fertilizer. So human urine is sterile when it leaves our body. As long as you're healthy, you can use it as fertilizer. So if you are sick or something, I wouldn't use it, but there are actually, I have a link and it tells you the different ratios. So you dilute it down and to maybe like a 10-to-1 or a 50-to-1 ratio, depending. If your plant is really young, you want to dilute it down more. If your plant is more mature, you don't have to dilute it down as much. But you pour that at the base of your plants, and the amount of nitrogen and potassium and phosphorus in human urine is astounding. And so it actually provides them a really, really great boost. So it does sound gross. I don't know if I'm going to be watering my plants with pee, but it is something that is out there. And the thing that we might be doing is you can actually put urine in the compost pile as a way to help that breakdown process speed up, because you have to water that compost. And if it's not wet enough, it's not going to break down very fast. So good way to get some extra nutrients in there and keep it moist. There you go. So those are your options for fertilizer. So before we finish, I did just want to touch base on the difference between soil amendments and fertilizer, because I did cover some of the same things. You're still touching on the same nutrients, so what is really the point? So amendments and fertilizers, they both focus on nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, and they're like macronutrients, obviously, that we want to be watching out for when we're growing plants. So amendments, although there are those quick release options that we talked about, such as blood meal, such as coffee grounds or worm castings, or wood ash, a lot of times amendments are used at the end of a season or right before winter as part of a slower process of change. So you're working on slowly improving the soil of that health gradually, or the health of that soil gradually and more holistically. So that's what your amendments are aiming to do. The fertilizers are more focused on that quick release so that the plants can get what they need. Also, you'll see that the amendments have a much higher concentration. Like our blood meal, that is all nitrogen all the time. A fertilizer is a little bit of a mix of both. And that worm castings, like I said, it has a lower concentration, but it's enough for your plants, but not necessarily enough for the whole area, if that makes sense. So, yeah, and then amendments are applied at the end of the season. Fertilizers are also going to be applied, so not just once, but several times. So I'm actually coming up next week. I will be adding just a teeny bit of fertilizer to my cabbages and broccolis that I planted 3 weeks ago. So they'll be 4 weeks old now, and they will just need that extra little boost to help them get to the next stage of growth. Once we get them in their spots in the garden, they'll get a little extra feed, and then maybe one more time closer to harvest, they'll get a little extra boost. So maybe 3 times, 2 to 3 times throughout the season, you're just giving them a little bit of an extra help. And it makes kind of sense because, like seedlings, they're fragile. So as they're growing, you want to help keep them, they're hardy. When you transplant them, even though you've hardened them off and they're getting used to the area, moving them to a new spot is still going to be a bit of a shock. So a little fertilizer at that time is going to help keep them strong and help them make it through that transition. And then, yeah, I touched on this, but so it's not necessarily like 100% true all the time, but in general, fertilizers tend to have some micronutrients mixed in there with as well. They're like a mix, whereas the amendments, you can select which exact ingredient you want and just add that. So it allows you to customize things a bit more and focus on really targeting what it is you're trying to boost in your soil. So that is day 3. That was a lot about dirt. We talked a lot about dirt, but if you want healthy plants, you need healthy soil. So if you're growing in containers, make sure you look at the ingredients in that potting soil that you're buying. Make sure, again, there's no chemicals, because a lot of those potting soils do have chemicals in them. Make sure there is a mix of nutrients in there if it tells you about that, and if it doesn't, that you're supplementing with something. And to make sure that you are providing your plants with the best place to live, because everyone wants a nice home. So this is going to be their home for the next season, and so we want to make sure that their home is it's got all the food they need. It's got a nice comfy place to stretch your legs, so it's not too compact, right? We can stretch out our roots and grow real tall, and it really does come down to that it's all about the dirt. So next week is a big, big week. We are going to be starting seeds together. I have started some of my cooler crop seeds, but that is okay if you haven't yet. I'm going to actually show you lots of different methods. So we're going to do soil blocks, we're going to do egg cartons, peat pots, plastic cups, all different kinds of things. Show you what to do, how to start your seeds, and how to give your plants the best possible success rate in terms of germination and growth. But that is it for day 3. I hope you learned a lot today. I learned a lot preparing for today, so I'm really excited. I feel like I just understand things so much better, so I hope you do as well. Click on all the links in the notes to learn more about things individually, and as always, comment down below or email me if you have any questions about anything related to preparing your garden space. All right, you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you next week.